There are several things that have to do with adornment that we can look at, but some are more simple than others. For example, the patterns that I showed you on those clothing.
If you go to Cuba society, there's patterns everywhere on the houses, the architecture, in their hats, their clothing. And so pattern indicates wealth. And they're always looking, there are about 200 named patterns in their vocabulary. And then they're always looking for new innovations.
We must remember when talking about culture that culture and history are not the same thing. History is times past, but culture is ever going. And so additions keep being made to the cultures. The African cultures, especially those of native bend, are cut off a little bit because you must remember in the past, Africans were the lords of their own life, meaning there weren't people blocking them from trading with others or doing anything like that. Any influence that was in was approved by themselves and no one else. But today, a lot of their customs and cultures have been cut due to law, due to artificial boundaries, and of course, invasions and colonization. Like I said again, in hot climates, you do not dress up too much, even though these people did. And like one historian said, the Africans merely created clothes for fashion as it was not necessary. But the pictures that I'm showing so far are of younger women. Usually in Africa, the older you get, the more covered up you become to the point where you couldn't even tell that these people were not bashful about the way they looked. Ancient Egypt was no exception. Now, of course, we could talk about clothes all day, and each community has their own variety of different types of clothing, but this is not a deep dive. Instead, this time we will talk about hair. The hair of the ancient Egyptians are a very intriguing thing. Firstly, because there are about four haircuts which you see consistently over and over again. There were others, but these four were the most utilized. For example, long braids, which are called Nubian wig, Nubian braids, Nubian wig. The second one is a afro, a big afro or a small one, depending on what you wanted. And thirdly, it's the cone shaped head thing that you find all over Africa. But also notice this headband that these ancient Egyptian women are wearing. And notice that this headband is the same as the Southern African one that I showed you and the Eastern African one that I showed you earlier. And this is based on these geometric patterns that I was showing you last time. You will also notice that the neck plate thing that they have is also got these geometric patterns on it. Another feature of adornment are these stretched ears with then a plate put inside. These are not earrings in the same sense that they hoop around the ear. They actually plug the ear lobe or the ear hole. And you have been found some in ancient Egypt. They found the plugs. You don't see a lot of depictions of this. You only see Tutankhamun with holes. You see a lot of ancient Egyptians with holes, but you don't see them actually wearing them in their painting, probably because their style of painting was so simple. Going down the body now, you see these beaded cuffs on the woman's arms. These, as you can see, are everywhere. Some supplemented with iron, some with copper, some with tin. And you can see they also have armlets, like those paintings have as well. Scarification is known the continent over, from the Nubians to East Africans to Southern Africans to West Africans. And the reason why this practice is done here is because tattoos are not as visible on darker skin, and so they would opt for scarification. Sometimes a mix, as you've seen with the Fulani people, they do like tattoos on top of scarification. This scarification would serve the same purpose as putting on clothes with magical spells and things of inoculation. So some of them are just ritually to tell you which tribe they came from, others are to protect you. And there's actually one time in South Africa where someone used scarification to completely disguise who they were, because some people were trying to identify who he was, but he knew if he got a whole bunch of scars on his face, they would not be able to recognize what tribe he came from. Also, these scars can show age and rank or experience. It just depends on the specific tribes, and obviously, some of these scars have been used as punishment as well, not just pleasure. To think that people used to scar their faces this deeply in the past is actually something that's very strange, but it's probably no more painful than getting a tattoo. Another customary thing is to wear belts in ancient Egypt, and you can see the pattern is one color, another color, one color, another color. And these belts are not belts like you put on a pair of pants and try to hold them up. Instead, they are fastly tightened to your body, and they basically don't do anything except for aesthetic purposes. And it's interesting that you find them in ancient Egypt and then you find them all over Africa. In East Africa, this tradition is preserved as well, but as you can notice with theirs, it's extremely large. But you can still see that the belt serves no purpose whatsoever. And it's funny how Egypt, if you contrast it with Africa, it's very difficult to separate their clothing styles. Maybe the clothes that are see through, the thing that they put on top, that you can say is different, but that's you can find that in East Africa. But if you look at it and compare it to Rome or Greece or the Middle East or Japan, China, Mesoamerica, you will realize that the clothes just in ancient Egypt are just too African. They stick too much to that one culture. And the reason is probably because their ancestral heritage disallowed them to stray too far. I mean, if you look at what they did from the beginning of their kingdoms to the end of their kingdom, they pretty much stuck to their original culture, every now and then adding something here and adding something there. But they're not like the Greeks or other people like the British later on who gobbled everybody else's culture. At one time, the Greeks didn't even want to wear pants because they thought that pants were feminine. And I think the Persians used to wear pants. And that's one of the reasons they thought they were feminine. And they also thought Persians were feminine because they had long hair. The men had long hair. Clearly, the Greeks won the hair battle, but they did not win the pants battle because today pants are considered extremely masculine. It's not that other tribes didn't wear pants, of course. I mean, pants have been found in Europe, they've been found in Asia, they've been found in Africa and America. So it's not like pants were not discovered in other places. Of course, when it's very cold, you would probably choose pants over any other type of clothing, especially if you're going to do a lot of work. But again, this cultural difference, though small or big, depending on whether or not you care, is a point where you can see there's a departure in culture. And this is how we separate cultures. Clothing is a big one. Well, what of the men? Well, the men were actually pretty simple compared to the women. Like in other African cultures, they usually wore something like a kilt or a loincloth depends what you want to call it. And it was fashioned, but usually was plain white. And then it had a chest plate over you sometimes. Most of the time, they just walk around bare chested. And then they had sandals on their feet. That was about the extent of their clothing for the most part. And this isn't just ordinary people. Even pharaohs are depicted merely wearing like this. Again, showing a true callback to their old culture where they started. This is honestly the widest departure from any other culture around the world. If you focus on how other cultures, their kings dress, they are so overdressed, it's not even ridiculous. Obviously, in ancient Egypt, they had crowns, and those crowns would have looked elaborate. Maybe they would have been showered with beads, but for the most part, they look like every other citizen. They look like warriors. You can easily contrast a warrior and a king in any other nation without some visual cues in Egypt. You can easily mistake them for a normal person.